Hello and welcome to the Age of Light interview series. It's an absolute delight to welcome Dr. Nilong Vyas to our conversation today. Nilong is a board-certified pediatrician and sleep expert and coach. She set up Sleepless in NOLA in 2014 because she's so passionate about the power and importance of sleep to support kids to become not only better learners but also to behave well too. So she was actually the Women in White Coats Hero of the Year 2019 and was also awarded top sleep coach in the USA. So she's such a fascinating person to speak to about sleep, and actually she has a service for parents and families who are struggling with sleep, and we're going to hear a bit more about how she does that. So thank you so much, Nilong, for your time. It's really great.
Of course. Thank you so much for finding me and inviting me to this interview.
Now, the first thing I wanted to ask you was, I was just intrigued by your name, which I've tripped over, Sleepless in NOLA. Just tell me how that happened.
Yeah, so in New Orleans, we had Hurricane Katrina. It's been 15 years actually this month, and it devastated New Orleans, Louisiana. And since then, a lot of businesses sort of took on the NOLA brand, which stands for New Orleans, Louisiana, and kind of put that together, and it became commonplace for a lot of businesses to use that abbreviation. So, and it's also a play on words with the movie called Sleepless in Seattle, which was a very famous movie back in the 80s, I think, or 90s. And so it was, since I'm talking about sleep and sleep specifically in New Orleans, although I do see families nationally and internationally, I started it to, say Sleepless in NOLA because that's where I'm located.
That's a wonderful story. Thank you. Down the name, I've been tripping over it, so that's really fantastic. So tell us, and I'm going to ask firstly why sleep is so important, and then I'm going to ask you to explain how, I suppose this interview series is all about light, so your experience of how light affects sleep, and then to talk a little bit about how you support families to get proper sleep. So perhaps we can just begin with a quick, obviously without scaring us too much, but why sleep is so important and what happened.
Yeah, so a lot of wasn't understood about sleep for so long. A lot of researchers are like, why do we need, sleep, and why do we fall asleep, and what does that do? And the current research has found that during sleep is when our bodies sort of regenerate and rest for daytime activities, and specifically our brains, and that's when our brains clean themselves. It wasn't understood for so long what the brains, because it doesn't have a lymphatic system, and the lymphatic system is what cleans the body, but the brain doesn't have a necessary lymphatic system. So it was like, well, how does the brain get cleaned? And through research, it's been discovered that during sleep is when the brain shrinks a tiny bit, and the fluid that is already present around the brain goes around and sort of collects all the waste particles, the proteins and amyloids that have been left behind, and cleans it. And so having a sustained amount of sleep allows that process to happen as it should, so those proteins don't get left behind. And so for families, and that includes adults as well as kids, when that process of sleep is interrupted with multiple wake-ups overnight, that cleaning process doesn't happen adequately, and then can lead to multiple issues later on, even including Alzheimer's disease.
Yes, because when you mentioned amyloid, I realised that's been implicated in Alzheimer's, hasn't it? So I had no idea that actually not only is sleep important because for mood and all those kinds of other stuff, but actually it's, if you're not getting enough sleep, then you're storing up problems for much later on. So that's a really fascinating insight. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, of course.
So tell us a little bit, if you can, about how light affects our ability to sleep. And actually you mentioned about technology, so tell us what you're finding in terms of the way that light is affecting sleep in our young people.
Yeah, so children are so inundated with technology these days, and especially now with the COVID pandemic, it's only made matters worse. And I've been helping parents improve their child sleep habits behaviors and the quality of sleep for over a decade. And despite the knowledge that's available to these parents, I believe the situation is just continuing to get worse because parents are just really struggling with the, technology and how beneficial it is or how useful it is in managing kids and keeping them occupied and engaged, and also struggling with what they hear on the news and in media about the sort of horrible nature of technology, and what it can do. So many parents are just using the technology to keep kids engaged and keep them occupied and feel as though they're being educated and entertained. And although that may be the case, parents don't realize that what the light from these devices is doing to their children, especially their eyes and ultimately their brains and development. So what typically happens and what's specifically happening is that melatonin is a hormone that's secreted by the pineal gland in the brain. And whether or not the brain and the gland produces this hormone is determined by the presence or absence of light. So when our bodies are in sync with this diurnal secretion of melatonin, with the rise and setting of the sun, before the invention of light bulbs and artificial light, those cycles proceeded normally. But then with the introduction of artificial light, those cycles were augmented erratically. And so what happens to children when they're exposed to these devices, especially before bedtime or nap time, their bodies are tricked into thinking it's daytime, and the melatonin production, which should be rising right around bedtime, starts to decrease. And kids have a harder time falling asleep. And what I call the shenanigans kind of start up, because they're like, oh, they're not really sleepy anymore because the melatonin isn't helping them kind of settle down and get to sleep. So they need one more sip of water and one more hug and one more kiss and one more book. And, parents end up getting into this behavioral struggle with their children. And it all kind of starts from this exposure to light and technology, which then ultimately affects their brain chemical and hormone, and then ultimately leads to behavioral issues.
How
all
interesting.
tied together.
I guess so. So tell us a little bit about how sounds like you've got lots of experience of how to support families to kind of get a better hygiene of sleep. So it sounds as though, I suppose, inviting kids to not use their screens is tough. So explain how you do that. What do most, I suppose, families present to you unable to sleep, exhausted, wired? And then how do you diagnose that? How do you work out what to do and how to support them? What do you do?
Yeah, so when families reach out to me saying they're having struggles with their children, and I deal with families and help families from birth all the way to adolescence. So when they reach out and say, my child is not sleeping through the night, they're waking up multiple times, they're having a difficult time falling asleep or staying asleep for naps as well as bedtime. The first step is to really evaluate their lifestyle and their schedules and what sort of sleep hygiene practices they have in place. And a lot of times it's just really all about education. Parents, I think, know what the right thing to do is because they hear about it and read about it, but it's oftentimes hard to implement those changes, especially when you have a rowdy toddler who's refusing to go to bed and wants his iPad or wants the TV. And parents are so exhausted with both parents working usually in the house that it's difficult to just say no. So a lot of what I do is educating the parents on what positive sleep hygiene looks like, encouraging them to turn off those devices at least an hour before bedtime so that the kids have the ability for the melatonin levels to rise appropriately and for them to feel sleepy and actually fall asleep. And also just, kind of coaching them as to what steps to take and how to put a plan into place. And then I'm there also to support them through it as they have questions and problems and concerns and troubleshoot, so that at the end of our 6-week program, not only is their child falling asleep independently, but sleeping through the night. And most of my families tell me now bedtime is an enjoyable experience. We cuddle, we read books, we hang out, and then we say goodnight, we tuck them in and leave, and they sleep the whole night through.
That is absolutely impressive. So it sounds like it's kind of a lifestyle question. And I guess exhausted parents perhaps get into a cycle of they're exhausted, they want to just park the kids in front of the telly or in front of an iPad and just leave them to it so that they can actually finally get some dinner or do the ironing or do whatever, you know, whatever else needs to be done, pay the bills or whatever. So it sounds like that it's actually to do with the kind of with the relationship. Maybe that's the starting point. Is that right?
Yeah, the relationship with not only the child, but within the family. And, you know, it takes sometimes some planning to say, okay, I know we stick them in front of the TV to get dinner ready, and that may be okay, but as long as dinner isn't too close to bedtime. So just planning and having some, maybe some meals prepped ahead of time so that when it is time for dinner, we can get, you know, they can get dinner started and ready quickly or quicker so that they don't have to have that time in front of the TV. And some parents just do it because the kids are asking it or demanding it, you know, and it is hard to say no. So like I said, it's a matter of educating and letting parents know what the consequences are to the child as a result of these choices, and help guiding them as to how they can make those changes without too much stress on them as well as the child. If they were to just take the iPad away, it's going to be lots of tears for everybody. But doing it in a gradual, modified fashion makes it easier for the whole family.
So it's really interesting what you were saying about working with little toddlers, because you can, or little kids, because you can sort of make bath time and kisses and cuddles and books and sort of remove the screens from them and actually make bedtime fun. But tell us about teenagers, because they're on their computers and doing their homework and social media and all of that stuff. So tell us how you go about inviting them to switch off as well.
Yeah, so with teens, the primary solution is getting them involved in the process and educating them. They're so connected to their devices and oftentimes are unaware of what these devices are doing to their bodies and brains and what the consequences are. And so oftentimes when they're educated, they want to take matters into their own hands and want to come up with a solution. So primarily educating them, and then secondarily getting them involved in coming up with a solution. And it's not easy, and by any stretch, by just saying, okay, let's get involved and let's make a plan together, but they're going to be a lot more receptive if they're given the education and then a way in which to come up with a solution, rather than saying, you know, no more iPad or no more phone after this amount of time or at this time. They're going to rebel against that. So getting them involved in the process and educating them is the key. And more so than not, you'll have a more reliable and harmonious household as a result. And the parents need to also follow suit. If they're saying, you know, all devices go off at 10 p.m. For the teen, and then they're on their devices, it's going to make it to where the teen does not want to follow suit. So education, getting them involved in the process, and also having a family plan that the parents follow also.
That's really, really interesting. Thank you so much. So just to wrap up then, tell us how people can reach out to you to work with you.
Yeah, so if they go to my website, sleeplessandnola.com, they can fill out a free consultation request, and we will speak specifically in person on the phone to determine what it is that they're struggling with and how I can help them. And most families that work with me are successful within the 6-week time frame, oftentimes sooner.
That's
So
really
www.sleeplessandnola.com. I'm also on Instagram and Facebook with the same handle. So please reach out. There's no need to have to struggle and be tired, because having that happen affects not only you and your happiness, but affects your life, it affects your time with your spouse. So, and it affects the development and behavior of the child. So sleep is so crucial, and it's not something that they will necessarily grow out of. It's something that needs to be managed and handled as soon as possible, and so that they don't have lifelong issues as they get older.
well. Thank you. So there's help out there. We just get to reach out to you to find a way through the sleepless nights and into a happier and healthier and more relaxed family life. So
Yes.
can't
Let's
thank you
do it.
enough. Thank you.
You're
Bye.
welcome. Thank you for getting this message out there.